Hello and welcome to Political Brew. I'm Phil Hirschkorn. Today's topics: the U.S. Senate race, Graham Plattner and Susan Collins, and Plattner's latest embarrassing headaches, while Collins sets a record, and closing arguments, the Democratic and Republican races to be Maine's next governor. My guests are Emily Cain, a Democrat, former state legislator and Maine House Minority Leader from Orono, and Jason Levesque, a Republican, former three-term mayor of Auburn. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Presumptive Democratic U.S. Senate nominee Graham Plattner had a rough week, bookended by national newspaper stories calling attention to problematic personal behavior, his marriage, and allegations he either dodged or denied. First, the Wall Street Journal and New York Times reported Plattner's wife, Amy, caught him sexting up to 6 other women after they married. Here's what Plattner told me about that.
These people are going to try to make this race about anything but what it's supposed to be about, which is policy. They never want to talk about policy. Amy and I have a very loving and very happy marriage. They would very much like to try to rip that apart. They're going to come after us in every awful way that they possibly can.
Then the Times reported Plattner was a bad boyfriend, and 3 exes felt he was intimidating. The most critical anecdotes from one woman he dated 13 years ago, who described as being physically rough with her, which Plattner denied in an interview with Chris Hayes on MS Now.
Did that happen?
No, it did not. There are some allegations in this piece that I just want to be kind of unequivocal about are simply not true. Anything alleging physicality, anything alleging that I knew what my tattoo was, these are the statements of someone who's politically motivated. In this piece, there's a lot about my struggling, not being a good boyfriend, certainly self-medicating with alcohol, and I've been very upfront since the beginning of this campaign that was a pretty dark period of my life after I came back from my combat service.
Well, Emily, this is probably the Democratic nominee, your party. Your thoughts?
It is objectively true that these last 2 weeks have been the hardest yet for the Graham Plattner campaign. And it is, these are disturbing revelations, and they are becoming increasingly harder for him to explain. That being said, he's going to be the nominee. There's no indication he is not. And so now it's up to him. Is he going to be the one keeping this campaign focused on the contrast with Senator Collins? Is he going to be the one talking about the price of gas and groceries? And is he going to have the ability to sort of have this redemption story that he has been building his campaign around since last year resonate authentically, not just with Democrats, but with independents? In a lot of ways, the general election started for Graham Plattner the minute Janet Mills stopped campaigning. And then it has led to some rough weeks for his campaign. After this next week, after he is officially the nominee, it is all eyes on November, and it is all about the contrast with him and Senator Collins. And that is, this is a tough situation in an already tough race. So I say it's got to be on him to keep the campaign focused on the right issues and to try to bring that authenticity that he has, that honestly has led him to resonate with so many, even through many difficult stories over the last year, to keep that up and expand that trust building, if you will, to Maine's independent voters.
Jason, when chased into an elevator in the Capitol, Susan Collins said of the first story about the sexting, it's a character issue.
It's absolutely a character issue. And the problem I have, and I agree absolutely with what Emily said, to a point, authenticity is the operative word. He has no authenticity. He is an empty shell of a human, and I say that as a Mainer, as a fellow veteran. I am absolutely disgusted. My wife said he is a disgusting human being. And she's not a political analyst by any means, but she represents the vast majority of Mainers. And I think that's what we're going to see now. And I think the data that comes out of Tuesday is going to be really important. But I think you're also going to see this come November as well, and all along the path. I mean, let's break it down. At this point, you can't trust an individual who has lied compulsively, repeatedly. I mean, honestly, going forward between now and November, whenever Plattner comes up, you probably need to replace me with a psychiatrist. Okay, because that is the only person who can really delve down into his psyche and understand what he's thinking. His excuses over and over for poor actions, represents veterans in a very poor light. He is not an example of your average, the super majority of veterans out there. It's embarrassing being a veteran with him out there raising the flag, saying he was an infantryman and a Marine and so forth. I was an infantryman. I knew a lot of infantrymen when I was on active duty. I was a drill sergeant. I saw a lot of different people. Not everyone in the military is perfect. he is definitely falls into that category. He is not perfect. He's a poor representation. Now, with that said, getting my personal animosity towards P. Hustle or Graham Plattner or whatever his new nickname du jour is, let's look at the facts. He has yet to come out with a solid policy issue. It's all been talking points. Yes, there are a group of individuals, a minority of Mainers, who absolutely can't stand the president, and they have decided that they, unlike what I believe Michelle Obama said, they must keep going low. Wasn't it the First Lady who said, if they go low, we go high? Well, they have thrown that out the window, and they keep going low, and they're going lower, and they're making excuses. And frankly, Mainers are starting to see their true colors shine through. This is not a campaign for Graham Plattner. This is a campaign against President Trump. Trump only has 2 more years. The next person we have representing Maine will be there for 6.
Is winning back the Senate just the overriding priority? Stick with this flawed candidate? And do you think Mills supporters, because she's still on the ballot, might come out more than we thought to register their protest?
I think the Democrats are coming out to vote, period, right? We already see in early primary voting numbers, Democrats are outpacing Republicans, basically 3-1. And independents are coming out as well, representing close to 20% of the vote so far, and they are choosing the Democratic ballot 3-1. The enthusiasm competition is, I think, already over and won by Democrats. And that's where the opportunity comes for Graham Plattner to have a reset after next week. That's what he needs, because there's no arguing all the things you said about the challenges he's facing. I'm not going to try to do that, but the onus is on him now to try to make that story, to make it authentic, to show up as he has. I will say, I got to give him credit for going on national TV last night to try to have this conversation. It's a difficult conversation to have. It's troubling. It's upsetting, right? But ultimately, it's on him. If he's going to be the nominee for the Senate, which he is going to have to continue to answer these questions and going to have to do it in a way that shows people he can be trusted, and that is going to be a tall order, but it is one that he has shown he's not afraid to go after.
Let's just take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll keep talking about Graham Plattner and Susan Collins setting a record. Susan Collins has set a U.S. Senate record.
Ms. Collins.
Collins casting her 10,000th consecutive Senate roll call vote, a streak that began when she began there in 1997. Her first vote to confirm Madeleine Albright as the first woman Secretary of State. Collins has never missed a roll call vote in 30 years.
Growing up in northern Maine in Aroostook County, I learned the values of hard work, perseverance, and keeping your commitments.
Now, Maine Democrats had this to say. Collins loves to brag about never missing a vote, but it's the votes she cast that have hurt Mainers the most, from overturning Roe v. Wade, I think they're referring to the Kavanaugh vote, greenlighting historic health care cuts, or confirming controversial Trump cabinet members. Collins has been a reliable vote for the MAGA agenda, voting with Trump 96% of the time. That's the record she'll have to defend in the coming months. Collins also prides herself on bipartisanship and her independent streak. The latest example as Appropriations Committee chair, defying President Trump on his hopes for $1 billion for the proposed White House ballroom and $1.8 billion for a so-called anti-weaponization fund, or slush fund, as critics call it, to pay off political allies, including January 6 rioters he's already pardoned. Here's what Collins told me about those 2 requests last week in Jason's backyard of Auburn.
I made very clear that that was something I could not support. The president has said that the new ballroom is going to be financed privately. He should keep to that commitment.
Well, Jason, she's certainly the Cal Ripken of the Senate.
Yeah, she is. She is. And she's wonderful. I had a privilege having lunch with her after that. I worked with her and her staff very hard to get that funding for our new fire department in Auburn. It's just one example of many throughout the state of how she actually does work. Yes, we elect people to make votes and make decisions. She's made 10,000 of them without missing a single one. That's a perfect representation record. And for the Democrats, the state Democrat communication that just came out is disingenuous. She didn't vote to overturn Roe versus Wade. She voted for Kavanaugh. She actually did what her job in the Constitution is, to advise and consent on nominations made by the president. She did that, just like she did with Madeleine Albright. That's a great pull from history, by the way. She is doing everything that she is supposed to and elected to do from a job standpoint. We might not always agree with every single vote, but we do have to respect the fact that she's doing it for a long period of time and consistently well. There's not about ego with Senator Collins. That's an absolute fact. You talk about early in the other segment about how it takes courage or some other word you use to describe Graham Plattner going up and talking to the press and everything like that. It's not hard. It's easy if you're a narcissist. What we're seeing with Senator Collins is the complete opposite of narcissism. We have a true representative in Maine. I think Mainers are going to recognize that now and for the next 6 years to come.
Emily?
So I'm a bit of a political nerd, and I love institutions, like the U.S. Senate. It's amazing. So let's just, you can't knock it. It's 10,000 consecutive votes. That's cool. But let's just own that that's a worthwhile celebration. Let's also note that there's very little that Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans come together to cheer for these days. So I'm sure for all of them, it was a bit of a lighthearted moment among colleagues. And great. But what the Maine Democratic Party came out with is exactly the conversation we're going to be having for the next 5 months, which is what's embedded in those votes. And Senator Collins will point out the votes that she has to bring money home to Maine, to fund projects, to fund research, to fund a lot of things. And Democrats and Graham Plattner and others will point out the votes like the big, beautiful bill that stripped health care subsidies from people who are now struggling to pay and afford health insurance. And those examples will abound. It will come back to votes that have to do with the war in Iran. It will come back to votes that have to do with how do we deal with health care? How do we deal with the price of energy? How do we deal with national security? And how do we put a check on Donald Trump? This is the conversation we're going to be having. We can have a celebration about 10,000 consecutive votes and talk about how not all of them were necessarily good for the people of Maine.
After initially supporting the N-word, she kind of led the charge among Republicans to vote the war powers to withdraw troops. And she voted against final passage of the big, beautiful bill, having voted to advance it because of the Medicaid cuts, she says.
The same way that somebody with no voting record, right, has to be held accountable for the things they've said and things they do. When you are somebody who has cast 10,000 votes, they are all up for debate and for a relook when you run for re-election. We've both dealt with that. Jason has, I have. You cast votes, and then you run for re-election. People say, "What'd you do for me?" Right? So this is going to be at the heart of the Senate race from both sides. Senator Collins talking about her commitment and her longevity of service to Maine, and Democrats and others who are frustrated, particularly with the president, saying, "But is that enough?"
Can I just, if I can get one word in, that'd be great.
Yeah.
That's my fault. I'm keeping the time.
Yeah, I understand. But let's talk about two words you said. You talked about Democrats and others. That's the operative word. After Tuesday, I don't think there's going to be many Democrats speaking negatively about Senator Collins or speaking positively about Graham Plattner because they're not going to want to be associated with him. So
that may
there
be
you
true.
go. Well,
I don't know.
Maybe you're already seeing it, Emily. You're already seeing it. And I hate for you to defend Graham Plattner at this point, but let's look at the facts. You said that. You said others. There will be no others. And when we're talking about the votes cast, let's talk about the good votes cast. Let's talk about the good work cast. It's disingenuous for the Democrats in Maine to really, or around the country, to just kind of plaster this MAGA thing as just a bad word. It's really an acronym for Make America Great Again. Now, whoever's carrying that flag is carrying that flag. But let's look at it. Let's break it down into its four component parts. Let's make America great again. Let's continue to make America great again. Let's keep evolving and keep the discourse as high as we can, even if one person, regardless of which party they're in, lowers the bar so low. Doesn't mean the next person that's coming in for a different office should set the bar any lower. Let's look at good statespeople, whether it be Republican or Democrat, and try to emulate that.
This race is going to be decided by the independent voters of Maine. It always has been, right? The same voters who in 2020 elected Joe Biden statewide in Maine, but also elected Susan Collins statewide in Maine. Maine is a purplish state when it comes to the statewide vote. It has gone for the Democrat for president for a very long time. It has also elected Susan Collins for a very long time. And has now elected Angus King, an independent, multiple times as well. This race in November is going to be decided by independents, and I think independents are not a group that necessarily always do what you expect they will. And when you have a president like Donald Trump in the White House with an outsized megaphone, as he should, he's the president, that is going to be a factor in this race, whether Susan Collins wants it to be or not. And my guess is she's going to stay in the lane of I'm for Maine, which has always been her lane, and Donald Trump is going to make it very hard for her to keep it there.
Okay, we'll have to take another quick break. When we come back, we're going to shift gears to our governor's races. First, the Democrats. The 5 Democratic candidates for governor in the final days before the June 9th primary. Shanna Bellows, Troy Jackson, Angus King III, Hannah Pingree, and Nirav Shah, each appealing to undecideds and independent voters who can vote in either party's primary.
Here in Maine, we are going to focus on things like feeding hungry kids and funding our healthcare system and fixing our housing crisis and fueling the growth of our economy.
I'm running to protect democracy and civil rights for every single family and child in our state, no exceptions. And I'm running to deliver an economic New Deal for Maine.
Maine is a special place filled with people who want to get along, who want to get things done, who want to buckle down and make life better for their communities and each other.
Everyday working class people deserve a seat at the table in state government, and that's something that I've been trying to do my entire life because that's who I am.
It's not just an important election that I win, it's a really important election that we all win on the issues that matter so much to Maine's future.
Well, Emily, you are Hannah Pingree's treasurer. What do you make of the state of the race?
I mean, I think it's exciting that the people of Maine are finally getting to pay attention to this race, which has been the shift for me in the last week. As the Graham Plattner stuff has started to play out and Janet's backed off the campaign, Democrats are like, oh, let's talk about the governor's race. And we've seen a lot of things come out. We're seeing new policy plans still rolled out. Hannah Pingree rolled out an education plan yesterday. We're seeing some contrast developing between candidates as they try to stake their claim and lay out themselves as the number one choice and another as a number two choice. We're also seeing shifts in the polling. We saw a poll from UNH in the last 2 weeks that had Troy Jackson and Nirav Shah in the number one and number two. Well, Nirav and Troy, the number one and number two. We saw a poll in the last 48 hours from the Bangor Daily News that puts Hannah Pingree over the top of Nirav Shah to win the race by their prediction. So I would say it's now all about who's showing up on Tuesday. As I mentioned earlier, we're seeing Democratic enthusiasm very high in the early vote. On Tuesday, I expect we'll continue to see that. But we know we won't know the results on Tuesday. I will say as a Democrat, I'm very proud of this primary. They have really done a good job elevating the debate, elevating the excitement. And I think what we're seeing play out here in the final days is the candidates who've been running the most consistent, clear communication over the longest period of time. As voters are lifting up their heads to pay attention, those are the candidates that we're going to see cross the finish line first.
Jason?
Yeah, I mean, there's everything Emily said. It's nice, kumbaya. Everybody's ranking and who's my best buddy, 1, 2, and 3 choice. And then, you know, you roll out Graham Plattner.
Would you rank me? I mean, I don't know.
You'd be about 9 right now after today. No, I'm just joking, Emily. I'd vote for you over any of those other folks.
Thank you.
Because you know why? You would not be in Graham Plattner's top 3 list. And that is something that we need to watch.
So Plattner said he ranked Jackson first, Bellows second, and Pingree third.
I don't think it's going to hurt Hannah at all. Bellows, she's really just not even there. She's not viable.
Why do you say that?
Yeah,
why do I say that?
It's
her commercials, her activity, her demeanor, her energy isn't there. And if it is there, it's contrived.
Do you think Republicans in the fall wouldn't vote for her because she's staked out such a strong anti-Trump position on voting issues, disqualifying him at 24 and so forth?
No, I don't think it's any of that. I don't think it's any policy. She just comes across, and something that we should talk about in politics because it's important, part of politics is she doesn't come across as trustworthy. She comes across as fake. I told them to jump in the Gulf of Maine. Contrived answer. How long did it take for her to come up with that before she actually said it? There's a lot of those little things. People want authenticity. They want reality. They want honesty. And you can tell that from someone's voice, the inflection, modulation, the tone. You don't get that from Shanna Bellows. You do get that from the other candidates, though, for the most part. Some are better than others. And I think talking about their individual personalities and their communication skills is important because that's going to make a difference in the final outcome, whether it's June 9th or it's in November. Now, what I will say is I think Troy Jackson is going to take a bigger hit than most because of the Graham Plattner endorsement, and not just an endorsement, or a ranking, if you would, which is kind of an endorsement, even though they all, before the controversy, they all walked out hand in hand and thanked Graham Plattner for endorsing them as their 3, 2, or 1 pick. The problem here is Troy's been side by side and hitched his wagon to Graham Plattner. Well, that's not exactly a great thing to do, especially during all this controversy.
Maybe a month ago, that seemed like
it seemed like an interesting, but you know what? You should be running on your own merits and your own ideas and your own
trying to do that
background.
too.
But I will say,
what about electability? Is that a factor for Democratic voters going into the booth?
Yes, I do. But I think it's important to say, what the campaign Graham Plattner's been running is the kind of coalition campaign Troy Jackson has been doing for a very long time. Like before any of us knew Graham Plattner, right? And I say that as someone who's campaigned with and against Troy Jackson, that this is his model. He comes by it honestly, the coalition he has with the labor unions. I think with Shenna, her role as Secretary of State has put her in the press more than most of these other candidates. The same way Dr. Shaw's role in the CDC has a lot of people who think, oh, I remember him in the pandemic. Of course, that guy, right? And then you have the strength of the campaign that Hannah has run with very consistent communication, and her being the only one endorsed by Governor Mills here in the last 2 weeks, which I think was not knowing what was going to happen with Graham Plattner, the timing of it was very interesting. And I completely forgot the question you asked me. Electability.
Strategic voting.
So I think people feel like they have good choices on our side here, and so they are going to vote with their heart, and they're also going to vote with their head. So I think you're going to see a lot of people vote their heart in that first choice. Who's moved me? Who do I feel the most connected to? And then they're going to vote 2 and 3, they think
those two
could
things
also
don't happen
win.
in elections. People don't vote with both their heart and their head.
With ranked choice voting,
if that was the case, Jesus would be elected every single presidential election.
I don't think he's on the ballot.
I don't think he's on the
but
ballot.
you know what? If that was true, he would be. So
I'm sorry, we'll take a quick break and we'll come back with the 7 Republican candidates for governor after this.
That's good.
The 7 Republican candidates for governor are in the home stretch. Jonathan Bush, Bobby Charles, David Jones, Garrett Mason, Owen McCarthy, Ben Midgley, and Robert Wessels. So many of them it takes 2 screens to show you all their faces. We caught up with most of them this week as they made their final appeal for voters.
No more solar subsidies, and we're not going to pull those dams out of the river. There will be no boys and girls sports or their showers.
A Mason administration budget will be built around 3 basic principles: lower taxes, less spending, and less government. I can tell you that there's over $1 billion that we could cut right away.
Not to mention, Maine is now near to being a welfare state. We have over 400,000 people receiving state benefits, but we only have 750,000 taxpayers, and these folks on the welfare system have no way off the system because that's how the Democrats set it up.
This is a state that desperately needs businesses to come. If people wonder why their property taxes are going up, it's not because our schools got bigger, it's not because our roads got bigger, our roads are getting smaller, our schools are getting tired. It's because the share of property taxes paid by businesses is going down as businesses leave.
I have a 5 and a 3-year-old. I'm very self-motivated to make sure that we build a state that they can thrive in into the future, and then the next generation can have a job that pays enough to afford to live here. And so that means we got to create better paying jobs.
And for what it's worth, David Jones told us he ranked Midgley 2nd, McCarthy 3rd, Bush 4th, Mason 5th, Wessels 6th, and left off Bobby Charles, who some people think might be the front runner. Jason, how do you see the race entering the final days?
It's going to be interesting because it's the first time really that Republicans, and just recently, have kind of, I'm not going to say embraced, they haven't embraced it, they're trying to understand it and use ranked choice voting, okay? Nobody likes it, but it is what we have. It's the car we have. It's what we're going to drive to work. So they're using it. And you're seeing this jockeying happen, probably not as sophisticated as the Democrat side, fair enough, but they are using it. This race is coming down to character. It's coming down to a little bit of likability, but really, how do we get a job done? Because we know there's an amazing amount of things that need to be fixed in Augusta. I think this race comes down to, in no particular order, it's going, and then I have a shocker, it's going to be Bush, Midgley, and Owen McCarthy. Here's my shocker, and maybe we'll do a little side bet. I think in the 4th round, Owen McCarthy might get enough votes to break the 50.
He's not well known, but has proven very likable on the campaign trail.
Everybody's 2nd or 3rd choice.
I've known Owen since he was in college. He is a
If you were
he's a
voting
great
Republican,
guy.
you'd vote for him?
I'm not allowed to make endorsements in that, but
I wouldn't be.
But
shocked.
I like him. I served in the board of trustees with him, so I do know him. I
wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if it was. I wouldn't be shocked if it was Bush or Midgley.
Youngest candidate in the race.
It's going to probably be one of those
38?
3. Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
I think Garrett Mason's running a strong race. In a different way than the others.
Was the runner-up last time.
He was a runner-up, and you can't take that away from him. And you can't take away his kind of bench, if you would, and foundational support. It's very strong and very active.
Only one with Augusta experiences, too.
Yeah, he's the only one with Augusta experience. I don't think Bobby Charles made a strategic error, though. he is definitely the front runner. On round one, I think we're going to see him with 40% of the vote.
Was first in the Republican convention straw poll.
Sure. I think he's going to get 40%. But I think the strategic error
But he can't get to 50?
He's not anyone's second or third or fourth choice.
And what's the strategic error?
That. He actually, a month and a half ago or something, he actually said, nope, just vote for Bobby Charles, number one across your first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and so on. Vote. He said that. And people that are supporting Bobby Charles will take that to heart because they hate ranked choice voting so much. That's what they're going to do on election day.
By the way, voters who do that can do that. It still counts once.
It just counts
Emily,
once.
what's your take?
I'm going to do a quick throwback to 2010, when on election night, on the primary night,
Paula Page's
nobody saw Paul LePage coming because he had not spent the most money, he had not been on air. So I will say that in 2010, any crystal ball I have for Republican primaries broke. I've not been able to put it back together. So I don't know who's going to come out on top, but I do think that it is possible that David Jones will have more signs up across the state than primary voters actually come out to vote for Republicans. It's an unbelievable amount of signs across the state. But I actually find this very intriguing. I agree with your assessment of Bobby Charles. He has done nothing to earn anybody, to be the second choice for anybody else. And I think the combination of Midgley, Mason, and McCarthy have tried to take up that space of we are this other set. And then you have Jonathan Bush, who is on everybody's TV. He's everywhere. And this is going to be a test of, does that money communication matter?
Or the name.
Or the name. I mean, it's a pretty well-known name.
We live in America, and we can't have hereditary titles in America. It's actually against the law, and that is one of the base fundamental greatnesses of this country. Is we're not judged upon our father's sins or our mother's family or what have you. I will say this:
uncle's cousin,
but it doesn't matter. But I was a Republican nominee back in 2010 for CD2, as you know, and I watched those 7 play out and every single event for months. It was fascinating watching them. I will say this, I was every single campaign event, and I strategically planned those election night parties to make sure we ended up at LePage's in Waterville at the end of the night. I didn't come up with this myself. I was told this by other candidates for that space.
That he was the guy to watch?
He was the guy, because it's kind of a setup like this. The only big difference is we didn't have ranked choice voting.
Right, there was no ranked choice voting.
If we had ranked choice voting in 2010, we would have Governor Otten for 8 years.
Emily, do Democrats have a favored opponent, maybe the most conservative opponent?
No. I'm going to say no, because I think actually the person who's going to be watching for the results of this more than anybody in the next week and a half, two weeks really, is going to be Rick Bennett.
Yeah, Rick Bennett, the former Republican senator, now an independent.
Rick Bennett has got to be hoping for the 2 most extreme versions of their party on both sides so that he can take up the middle. And I think that, certainly Bobby Charles would fit that bill for him. I think he would say any number of the Democrats would. I think Hannah Pingree is probably the toughest, and I say that,
objectively, even though you're her treasurer.
I am her treasurer, but I think the way her campaign is run puts her in that very pragmatic space, which puts it tougher with him. But Rick Bennett is going to be the guy with the biggest tin of popcorn as ranked choice voting is being decided to say, who am I going to be?
And we learned this week, because it was the filing deadline, Rick Bennett will be the only independent on the gubernatorial ballot.
And that's going to matter, because you know it, but make sure viewers know, we do not use ranked choice voting in the general election in the governor's race. So this will be which of the 3 candidates gets the most votes, the plurality.
Well, something to talk about for the next 5 months.
We will.
That's all for this edition of Political Brew. Thanks to our analysts, Emily and Jason, for joining us, and thank you for watching.